Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian and resistance fighter, articulated a thought-provoking and unsettling perspective on human stupidity, one that goes beyond a simple intellectual deficiency or a momentary lapse in judgment. For Bonhoeffer, stupidity is not just a flaw. It represents a significant and harmful social force that is paradoxically more perilous than evil itself. He contends that stupidity manifests as a resistance to critical thought, an active refusal to consider actions, ideas, and their repercussions. Unlike evil, which can be challenged and contained through rational discourse, stupidity is resistant to intellectual engagement. It defies awareness, self-correction, and the potential for transformation. Bonhoeffer's insights highlight the important difference between ignorance and stupidity. While ignorance may arise from a lack of information, stupidity is a more profound and entrenched state, an unwillingness or inability to accept new ideas, facts, or perspectives. Individuals who are stupid do not merely lack knowledge. They actively dismiss the possibility of learning or changing their viewpoints. They often hold tightly to their unexamined beliefs and reject intellectual challenges that could compel them to face uncomfortable realities. Consequently, stupidity is not just a lack of thought. It is a refusal to engage in critical thinking, rendering it an insidious and self-sustaining force. In this regard, stupidity poses a greater threat than ignorance because it obstructs opportunities for growth and understanding. This perilous mindset is most chillingly illustrated in the historical context of authoritarian regimes, particularly during the rise of Nazism. Bonhoeffer observed how the passive acquiescence of ordinary people became a crucial factor in the regime's effectiveness. The unwillingness to think critically or challenge authority enabled the Nazi regime to commit atrocities on an unimaginable scale. The destructiveness of this compliance stemmed not from active malice, but from the lack of resistance from individuals who had become desensitized to moral and intellectual questioning. Individuals, often characterized by a profound passivity, allowed themselves to be engulfed by the regime's ideology, accepting its simplistic and perilous narratives without scrutiny. Another significant element of Bonhoeffer's theory is the interplay between power and ignorance. When individuals attain power, they frequently become less willing to engage in critical thought. Power structures reinforce this tendency by rewarding conformity and penalizing independent thinking. Those in positions of authority often surround themselves with advisors and systems that validate their biases, creating a cycle of ignorance that is hard to break. Consequently, the powerful may become less self-aware, more resistant to differing perspectives, and more inclined to follow authority without question. This dynamic fosters an environment where decisions are made based on irrationality or incompetence rather than thoughtful consideration. In this context, ignorance becomes a powerful instrument for sustaining oppression and injustice. The true threat lies not in the malevolence of those in power, but in their inability or reluctance to engage with complexity, reflect on their actions, or challenge the existing order. Bonhoeffer's paradox uncovers a harsh reality. Individuals who are foolish, particularly those in positions of power, can pose a greater threat than those who act with malicious intent. Their blind adherence to authority, reluctance to question, and resistance to intellectual development render them powerful agents of social and political harm. In an era where critical thinking and self-reflection are increasingly disregarded, Bonhoeffer's observations serve as a stark reminder of the destructive influence of ignorance and its significant repercussions for society as a whole. Hannah Arendt, a German-American political theorist, built on Bonhoeffer's thoughts by introducing the idea of the banality of evil. According to Arendt, the most significant evil in contemporary society does not necessarily stem from the most malevolent individuals, but rather from the commonplace nature of those who carry out atrocious acts without contemplating their implications. This notion, which she presented in her examination of Adolf Eichmann during the Nuremberg trials, shifts the emphasis from inherent malice to the disturbing ability of ordinary individuals to become instruments of evil through unthinking compliance and the lack of critical thought. Arendt contended that Eichmann, a principal figure in the Holocaust, was not inherently evil. Rather, he was a bureaucrat devoid of moral contemplation who simply executed orders without regard for the human toll. The ordinariness of his actions did not diminish his culpability. Instead, it illustrated that evil in contemporary society can flourish not only through the actions of disturbed individuals, but also through those who neglect to critically assess their roles within broader systems. Arendt's idea closely aligns with Bonhoeffer's notion of stupidity, highlighting the risks associated with passivity and conformity among individuals. Eichmann's mentality reflects a form of unthinking compliance driven by ignorance rather than malevolence. He did not act out of a wish to cause harm, but rather from a mindless submission to authority. His inability to question his actions or contemplate their consequences reveals the profound intellectual and moral stagnation that can arise from a refusal to engage in critical thinking. This intellectual passivity, or stupidity, enabled Eichmann to become a central figure in one of history's most atrocious regimes. The banal nature of stupidity in this scenario extends beyond Eichmann himself. Arendt posits that modern societies are especially susceptible to such thoughtlessness due to immense pressures to conform and obey authority. Totalitarian regimes, in particular, take advantage of this psychological and intellectual inertia. They depend on the masses' lack of ability or desire to think independently and reflect, which creates an environment ripe for propaganda and manipulation. By managing the dissemination of information and simplifying complex issues into straightforward binary narratives, such regimes can effectively nurture a population that accepts their actions without question. This process turns ordinary citizens into tools of tyranny, not out of malice, but due to their intellectual passivity and their inability to critically assess the world around them. Arendt's theory emphasizes how institutionalized ignorance, manifested as blind obedience and uncritical thought, can sustain oppressive systems. The individual's unwillingness to challenge state authority, the neglect of moral responsibility, and the failure to acknowledge the broader implications of one's actions are all characteristics of the kind of mindset that facilitates tyranny. Arendt's perspective urges all of us to resist the pressures of conformity, to steer clear of thoughtlessness, and to scrutinize the power structures that influence our lives. It serves as a reminder that evil often thrives in the absence of careful reflection, and that our ability to make moral judgments relies on our capacity to think critically about the world and our role within it. In contemporary society, the triviality of ignorance continues to appear as a passive acceptance of oppressive ideologies and policies. In various settings, be it the workplace, politics, or social justice, we frequently observe individuals unthinkingly following directives or embracing oversimplified perspectives without grasping the wider consequences. This intellectual complacency, often disguised as loyalty or patriotism, poses a significant threat to democratic principles and human rights. The real challenge lies in rousing individuals from this mental lethargy, promoting independent thinking, and ensuring that those in power are subjected to critical and ethical evaluation. Arendt's concept of the banality of stupidity serves as a powerful reminder that ordinary individuals, when ensnared by conformity and intellectual inertia, can become agents of considerable harm. The pressing question is, how can we protect ourselves and our societies from this inclination? The solution is found in fostering critical thinking, self-examination, and the bravery to defy the pressures of authority and conformity. By engaging in these practices, we can escape the damaging cycle of ignorance and strive for a more reflective and equitable world. Bertrand Russell, a leading philosopher of the 20th century, was profoundly troubled by the intellectual currents of his era, particularly the increasing tendency to reward ignorance while punishing intelligence. He contended that in contemporary society, foolishness, especially in political and social contexts, often prevails over wisdom, significantly influencing the trajectory of history. Russell's critique of society's admiration for simplistic populist ideas over complex rational thought aligns with Bonhoeffer and Arendt's concerns about the perils of ignorance. However, Russell expands on this by highlighting the societal frameworks that not only permit, but actively promote the victory of ignorance. A central point in Russell's argument is that modern political and social systems frequently reward ignorance while punishing independent thought and critical analysis. In a landscape where intricate issues are distilled into catchy phrases and slogans, the public is urged to embrace oversimplified solutions that fail to tackle the genuine complexity of the challenges they face. Russell viewed this as a troubling trend, particularly in political discussions, where leaders who can convey easily understandable narratives often achieve greater success than those who provide more nuanced and thoughtful insights. Consequently, society tends to regard intelligence and reason as burdens, while superficial and simplistic beliefs are celebrated as virtuous. This intellectual environment fosters the ascendancy of foolishness over wisdom as individuals gravitate toward narratives that offer certainty and simplicity instead of engaging with the uncomfortable complexities of reality. Russell's analysis also addresses the psychological comfort associated with ignorance. Many people prefer to accept straightforward black and white narratives that deliver clear answers to complicated questions. In contrast, critical thinking can be uncomfortable and demanding, as it necessitates a willingness to confront ambiguity, uncertainty, and contradiction, elements that most individuals are hesitant to face. The appeal of straightforward answers, particularly when supported by media and political figures, is remarkably powerful. Russell recognized that while intelligence requires effort and self-reflection, ignorance provides a misleading sense of safety. This tendency to favor the ease of ignorance over the challenges of thoughtful analysis helps clarify why ignorance frequently overshadows knowledge in contemporary society. This issue is exacerbated by the emergence of mass media and social media in the 21st century. Although Russell's insights were made in the mid-20th century, they resonate strongly with today's media environment, where misinformation and oversimplification dominate. In the digital era, the swift spread of ideas via social media has fostered echo chambers, where individuals encounter only information that confirms their pre-existing views. This leads to the formation of ideological bubbles, replacing critical thinking with group consensus. The proliferation of misinformation and the relentless influx of sound bites hinder individuals' ability to engage critically with complex topics. The intellectual complacency encouraged by these platforms cultivates a setting where ignorance is not just accepted, but actively promoted. Russell's critique appears almost prophetic in this context, as the digital age has only heightened the issues he highlighted in his essay Philosophy and Politics. He also pointed out the irony that in many political systems, intelligence and rational thought can be perceived as subversive or even threatening. This is particularly clear in authoritarian or totalitarian governments, where those in authority often favor a submissive and uncritical citizenry over one that questions leadership or challenges existing norms. Russell contended that the more intelligent and contemplative individuals are within a society, the more likely they are to clash with the dominant political ideology, leading to their marginalization or oppression. This establishes a cycle where intelligence is not only undervalued but actively stifled, allowing ignorance to flourish. Echoing Bonhoeffer's examination of the connection between ignorance and authoritarianism, Russell emphasizes the crucial role of intellectual passivity in allowing oppressive systems to endure. His critique of the victory of ignorance over intelligence serves as a significant cautionary tale. The trend of rewarding ignorance and undermining critical thought is not a passive occurrence. It is actively encouraged through political, social, and media frameworks. The implications of this trend are extensive. A society that values ignorance over rationality is more inclined to adopt simplistic and harmful ideologies, overlook critical issues, and permit its political leaders to take advantage of the populace's ignorance. Russell's observations urge us to consider how our own society may be fostering a preference for ignorance, and to question whether we are prepared to face the discomfort that comes with intelligence in order to combat the harmful influence of foreign foolishness. Through education, a thirst for knowledge, and a dedication to critical thinking, we can start to counter the troubling trend that Russell articulated so well, and foster a society that values intelligence over ignorance. Stupidity is often not merely an individual shortcoming, but a socially contagious issue. Ideas, particularly those lacking rationality, can spread swiftly through communities, often gaining traction and support merely through repetition and social validation. This spread of ignorance poses a significant threat, as it undermines independent thinking and critical analysis on a societal scale. The way irrational beliefs and simplistic notions become prevalent is not coincidental. It stems from intricate psychological and social dynamics that promote conformity, suppress dissent, and cultivate environments where thoughtlessness flourishes. From propaganda to peer influence, the societal frameworks that enable ignorance are robust and deeply embedded in our culture. The rapid dissemination of ideas, especially those lacking evidence or logical foundation, is significantly aided by the channels of mass media and social media. In today's world, information circulates at an unparalleled speed, and not all of it is trustworthy or well considered. Misinformation, fake news, and overly simplistic narratives spread rapidly, often gaining popularity simply through constant repetition. This cycle fosters a misleading sense of credibility and truth, causing individuals to accept these notions without critically assessing their accuracy. In a landscape where anyone can share information, the distinction between fact and fiction becomes increasingly obscured, complicating the ability of individuals to differentiate reality from falsehood. In this context, independent thought is compromised by the overwhelming amount of information vying for attention, leading people to favor the easiest, most familiar explanations instead of engaging thoughtfully with more complex issues. One of the most perilous aspects of the social spread of ignorance is the influence of social groups and peer pressure in perpetuating this ignorance. As inherently social beings, humans often prioritize belonging and acceptance over independent thought. Social groups, whether political, religious, or ideological, cultivate environments where specific beliefs and attitudes are accepted as the norm, while dissent or critical thinking is often discouraged. This phenomenon is particularly pronounced in polarized societies, where group identity is closely tied to ideological conformity. In such settings, individuals frequently cease to think independently due to fears of social rejection or isolation. The urge to conform and the need for social acceptance can be so powerful that people start to adopt the beliefs and behaviors of their group without questioning them. Over time, this shared mindset results in the widespread acceptance of simplistic and uncritical perspectives that are frequently out of touch with reality. A significant factor contributing to the social spread of ignorance is the influence of authority and hierarchy on belief systems. From a young age, people are taught to accept the authority of figures like teachers, parents, and political leaders without questioning them. In many cultures, obedience to authority is regarded as a virtue, while critical thinking is often discouraged in favor of conformity. This is especially apparent in totalitarian regimes, where dissent is met with punishment and the state regulates the flow of information. However, even in more democratic societies, the respect for authority figures can lead individuals to accept their views without critical examination. When leaders and experts make statements, particularly on complex matters, many people tend to defer to them without scrutinizing the reasoning or evidence behind their claims. This reliance on authority can significantly hinder independent thought, fostering an environment where individuals cease to think for themselves and instead depend on others to define what is true. The peril of the social spread of ignorance lies not only in the proliferation of irrational beliefs, but also in its capacity to suppress intellectual diversity and critical discussion. When everyone within a social group embraces the same set of unexamined beliefs, it becomes increasingly challenging to question those beliefs or explore alternative viewpoints. This intellectual uniformity leads to groupthink, where individuals prioritize consensus and social cohesion. When a social group collectively embraces the same unexamined beliefs, it can suppress intellectual diversity and critical discussion, making it harder to challenge those beliefs or entertain different viewpoints. This intellectual uniformity fosters groupthink, where individuals prioritize agreement and social cohesion over independent thought and intellectual inquiry. Consequently, society experiences stagnation in ideas, superficial debates, and impeded progress. In such a setting, intellectual complacency becomes prevalent, and those who attempt to think critically or question prevailing norms often face ostracism or marginalization. To break free from this social contagion of ignorance, one must consciously resist conformity and nurture independent thought. A key strategy for achieving this is to cultivate a mindset that emphasizes questioning, curiosity, and skepticism, instead of accepting ideas without scrutiny. Individuals should learn to critically assess the information they encounter and pose challenging questions regarding its origin, reasoning, and evidence. This necessitates a willingness to step beyond one's social comfort zone and engage with ideas that may contradict personal beliefs. It also demands the bravery to stand apart from the majority and resist the influences of groupthink. Moreover, developing critical thinking skills should be viewed as a lifelong pursuit, involving continuous learning, self-reflection, and openness to new viewpoints. In a world where the spread of ignorance can occur rapidly, these intellectual tools are crucial for protecting one's ability to think independently and to foster a more thoughtful and discerning society. Ultimately, the social spread of ignorance is not an unbeatable force, but it demands active resistance. By promoting critical thinking, valuing intellectual diversity, and questioning authority, individuals can liberate themselves from the collective mindset that sustains ignorance. The proliferation of irrationality and conformity can be challenged through education, open dialogue, and a dedication to independent thought. By doing so, we can reclaim the power of reason and ensure that intelligence and reflection continue to influence our shared future. In the face of pervasive ignorance, manipulation, and intellectual complacency, breaking free from the cycle of ignorance is not merely a personal challenge. It is a societal necessity. History has shown us, particularly through the ideas of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, that a collective acceptance of ignorance can lead to disastrous outcomes. However, just as these forces are social in nature, so too are the methods for resisting them. In this final section, we will examine how the insights from these thinkers can aid us in avoiding the pitfalls of ignorance. The key is to foster independent thought, commit to critical engagement, and create a society that prioritizes intellectual complexity over simplistic ideologies. Above all, Bonhoeffer's theory of ignorance highlights the necessity of ongoing intellectual engagement. To break free from the trap of ignorance, we must dedicate ourselves to lifelong learning and the quest for truth, even when it feels uncomfortable. Bonhoeffer's critique of inaction is especially pertinent today, as the pressure to conform and the allure of simple solutions are ever present. The most effective way to counter these influences is to consistently push ourselves to think critically about our surroundings. This involves not only seeking new information, but also actively questioning our current beliefs and assumptions. Genuine intellectual development demands humility and the willingness to acknowledge that we could be mistaken. In a time when many individuals tend to seek out information that supports their existing views, the bravery to accept complexity and consider opposing viewpoints is more essential than ever. Arendt's concept of the banality of evil provides another vital lesson for breaking the cycle of ignorance, the necessity for moral and intellectual contemplation. Arendt illustrated that one of the greatest threats in contemporary society is the tendency of ordinary individuals to relinquish their moral duties and intellectual independence in the presence of authority. To escape this cycle, we need to reject passive compliance and accept our role as active moral agents in society. This involves cultivating the ability to question authority, engage with difficult ideas, and take responsibility for our actions. As Arendt pointed out, thoughtlessness is not merely an individual flaw, but a societal issue. Thus, it is our shared responsibility to combat thoughtlessness and create environments where independent critical thinking can thrive. Bertrand Russell's critique of the dominance of foolishness over intelligence urges us to identify the systems and structures that foster ignorance in many contemporary societies. Intelligence is often undervalued, while ignorance is rewarded, particularly in politics. To shield ourselves from the effects of ignorance, we must be aware of the intellectual forces that influence our world and remain alert to the media, political ideologies, and social frameworks that encourage simplistic and reductionist thinking. Russell argued that society frequently rewards conformity and punishes dissent, especially regarding complex and challenging topics. To break free from the cycle of ignorance, we must develop the courage to question dominant narratives and resist the forces that aim to simplify intricate issues into catchy phrases and slogans. Engaging critically with the world, rather than passively accepting whatever is presented to us, is the initial step toward intellectual freedom. The media, especially social media, plays a significant role in spreading ignorance in today's society. This is where ideas become oversimplified, distorted, and spread quickly. Social media algorithms, which aim to boost engagement, often favor emotionally charged and sensational content over more nuanced and thoughtful discussions. This fosters an environment where ignorance flourishes and critical thinking is neglected. To safeguard ourselves, we need to become more discerning consumers of information. This involves developing media literacy skills and learning to identify bias, misinformation, and propaganda. By questioning the sources of our information, we can start to escape the confines of the social media echo chamber and seek out more reliable and well-rounded viewpoints. Another effective approach to countering the influence of ignorance is to surround ourselves with individuals who challenge our thinking and promote intellectual growth. While social conformity is a strong force, we are also significantly shaped by those around us. By cultivating networks of people who value critical thinking, diverse perspectives, and intellectual honesty, we can create a counterbalance to the social pressures that promote conformity. These connections can provide the intellectual support needed to resist groupthink and nurture an environment where new ideas can thrive. Therefore, it is crucial to prioritize relationships with those who stimulate reflection, debate, and intellectual curiosity. Additionally, fostering a culture of intellectual humility is vital for breaking the cycle of ignorance. Humility in our thinking allows us to acknowledge that our knowledge is always limited and that there is much we can learn. It liberates us from the intellectual arrogance that often comes with certainty. Intellectual curiosity, which promotes a culture of humility, is crucial for breaking free from the cycle of ignorance. A humble mindset enables us to acknowledge that our understanding is always limited and that there is much more to learn. It releases us from the arrogance that certainty can bring and encourages us to engage with the world in a more open and inquisitive way. In a culture where individuals frequently feel pressured to project confidence in their beliefs, intellectual humility stands out as a rare yet invaluable trait. By nurturing this humility, we can approach the world with increased curiosity, a readiness to learn, and a greater potential for personal growth. Ultimately, breaking the cycle of ignorance involves not only resisting external influences, but also building internal resilience. We need to trust our capacity for critical thinking and to question the information presented to us. This task is particularly challenging in an environment rife with misinformation and oversimplification, but it is achievable by consistently pushing ourselves, questioning authority, fostering intellectual humility, and creating a community of independent thinkers. We can shield ourselves from the effects of ignorance and actively contribute to a more thoughtful, reflective society. In summary, the insights of Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell provide a compelling guide for escaping the cycle of ignorance. Although the forces that sustain ignorance are formidable, they are not unbeatable. By dedicating ourselves to lifelong learning, ethical contemplation, intellectual bravery, and social accountability, we can shield ourselves from the spread of ignorance. This commitment helps ensure that thoughtful analysis and moral principles remain at the forefront of our lives and contribute positively to the well-being of our communities. In light of the widespread impact of ignorance, we must position ourselves as resistors, thinkers, and inquisitors who can foster a brighter, more enlightened future. As discussed in this video, ignorance is a formidable and perilous force in our society, capable of influencing political arenas, social interactions, and even our personal convictions. However, by grasping the underlying factors and embracing the insights of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, we can safeguard ourselves against the dangers of intellectual complacency. It is our responsibility to nurture critical thinking, stand against the urge to conform, and commit to lifelong learning to escape the cycle of ignorance. If you found this discussion valuable and wish to explore these intricate ideas further, please remember to like and subscribe. We post new videos daily, providing you with valuable insights on a range of thought-provoking subjects. For those looking to deepen their understanding, check the link in the description and the pinned comment for a curated list of recommended books that will guide you on a path of intellectual discovery. Stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay critical. Until next time, keep questioning and keep growing.